The cold Chicago wind howled through the narrow streets, biting at the faces of hurried pedestrians as they rushed to their destinations. The city, a maze of bustling activity and dreams in motion, seemed alive with purpose. Yet, there sat Sophie in the corner of a small, cozy cafe, holding a warm cup of coffee to steady her shaking hands. Outside, the world moved swiftly, but she felt like an observer, trapped in a moment of uncertainty. She gazed blankly through the window, watching the hurried steps of strangers, each with a destination. They were all headed somewhere, on a path of their own, while Sophie wondered where hers had gone. 3 years earlier, life had felt much different. She had been filled with hope and ambition, her future bright. She had graduated at the top of her class from a prestigious pastry school, full of ideas and passion to open her own bakery. But life, as it often does, had different plans. Her mother's sudden illness had drained every cent of savings she had accumulated, and the mounting medical bills, combined with the escalating cost of living, had sent her into a spiral. She'd lost everything, including her home, and now found herself stuck in a cafe, scrimping by on minimum wage. Even her rent, a constant source of stress, seemed like an insurmountable challenge. As Sophie lost herself in her thoughts, the gentle chime of the cafe door rang through the air. She looked up absent-mindedly, her attention momentarily caught. Her heart skipped a beat when her eyes landed on the man entering the cafe. It was him, Keanu Reeves. Sophie blinked, unsure if she was imagining things. But no, it was unmistakable. There he was, walking into the cafe with a casual stride, wearing an old, weathered jacket that made him look, well, just like any other man. He didn't carry the aura of a Hollywood star. He looked simple, approachable, and real. He ordered a hot coffee and made his way to a quiet corner. Sophie's breath caught in her chest. Could it really be him? Her heart pounded. She had read countless stories about celebrities, but seeing one in person, in this humble setting, was an entirely different experience. An urge, a strange feeling deep inside, pushed her to do something she hadn't done in years, take a chance. Before she could second-guess herself, Sophie stood up, her legs trembling slightly, and walked over to his table. The words came out hesitantly, "Mr. Reeves. I mean, are you really you?" Keanu looked up, his eyes warm and understanding, and smiled. "Yes, but please, call me Keanu." Sophie chuckled nervously. "I'm sorry. It's kind of a shock to see you here, of all places." Keanu laughed too, his tone light and inviting. "Well, I guess life has its surprises. Want to sit down?" With a mixture of excitement and disbelief, Sophie nodded, taking the seat across from him. She had no idea what to say next. As they sipped their coffee in comfortable silence, Keanu's voice broke the quiet. "So, what's your story?" For a moment Sophie hesitated. She had never been one to share her hardships, but something about Keanu's calm presence made her feel like she could. With a deep breath, she opened up. She told him about her dreams of becoming a baker, about the tragedy of her mother's illness, the heartbreaking loss of her home, and how she found herself trapped in a cycle of endless struggle, barely making ends meet. Keanu listened attentively, his face full of empathy. His eyes never wavered from her, showing an understanding that Sophie had never encountered before. When she finished, there was a pause, and Keanu leaned back in his chair, lost in thought. "You know," he said, his voice soft yet filled with conviction, "I've been there too. I've felt lost, unsure of where to go, struggling to find a way forward." Sophie looked at him, bewildered. "But you're Keanu Reeves. Your life must have been so different." Keanu smiled gently. "Being famous doesn't shield you from hardship. I lost my best friend, the love of my life, and even my child. But through it all, I kept moving. Because life doesn't stop, and neither should we." Sophie's heart tightened at his words. "But how? How do you keep going when everything falls apart?" Keanu took a sip of his coffee, staring into the distance before responding. "One step at a time. That's all you can do." As the hours passed, their conversation delved deeper, and for the first time in years, Sophie felt like she had found someone who truly understood her pain. Keanu's words were not empty platitudes, but a lifeline that reached deep within her. Finally, Keanu looked at her, his eyes kind but firm. You still love baking, don't you? Sophie nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. More than anything. Keanu leaned in slightly. Then why not fight for it? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sophie sighed, the weight of her circumstances weighing heavily on her. I wish I could, but I don't have the money. No investors. No one believes in me. Keanu raised an eyebrow, a playful smirk forming on his lips. Maybe that's about to change. Before Sophie could ask what he meant, Keanu pulled out his phone and dialed a number, speaking with a confidence that surprised her. Hey, it's me. I need a favor. Sophie watched in disbelief as Keanu conversed with someone on the other end. When he hung up, he turned back to her with a smile. I have a friend who owns a bakery. He's looking for a talented pastry chef. You have an interview tomorrow. Sophie's jaw dropped. Are you serious? Keanu nodded. Dead serious. Her eyes filled with tears, and her voice wavered. Why are you doing this for me? Keanu's expression softened, his voice quiet but filled with sincerity. Because someone once helped me when I was lost. Now it's my turn to pay it forward. The next morning, Sophie's hands trembled as she walked through the doors of the bakery, unsure of what to expect. A man named James greeted her warmly, his smile infectious. I hear you're a pastry genius, James said, his voice filled with friendly curiosity. Sophie flushed, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. I try my best. James handed her an apron with a playful wink. Then let's see what you've got. Sophie's fingers moved instinctively as she baked, each motion reminding her of the passion she had once lost. The hours passed by in a blur, the kitchen becoming a world of its own where nothing else mattered. When she finished, James sampled her work and grinned. You're hired. Sophie almost collapsed from the weight that lifted from her chest. As she stepped outside, she saw Keanu waiting for her, a proud grin on his face. Well? He asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. I got the job, Sophie whispered, still in disbelief. Keanu chuckled softly. I never had any doubt. Sophie had never felt more alive than she did in her new role at the bakery. It wasn't just about the act of baking anymore. It was a rediscovery of who she was, a reclaiming of the dreams she had once thought were lost forever. Each day in the kitchen, she poured her soul into every pastry, every loaf of bread, every delicate cake that emerged from the oven. The warmth of the oven was like the warmth of hope, rekindled inside her heart. Her hands, once trembling with uncertainty, now moved with confidence and precision. The customers quickly began to take notice of the change in the bakery. They loved her creations, and soon they started asking for specific pastries by name. Word spread, and what had started as a small, quiet cafe with only a few regulars became a bustling, lively establishment. Every morning, the line stretched out the door, filled with people eager to taste the magic that Sophie had resurrected. But it wasn't just the pastries that made her bakery special, it was the spirit that infused the entire space. Sophie had become more than just the pastry chef. She was the heart of the place. And she wasn't alone. As the business grew, she hired more people, giving struggling chefs an opportunity to start fresh, just as she had. Her success was becoming a community effort, a testament to the power of second chances. One evening, as Sophie was finishing up her shift, James, the bakery owner, approached her with an envelope in hand. This came for you, he said, his eyes gleaming with a knowing look. Sophie raised an eyebrow, unsure of what it could be. As she opened the envelope, her hands trembled slightly, and she gasped when she saw the check inside. It was made out to her, signed by none other than Keanu Reeves. The note that accompanied it was simple but profound, for your future bakery. Keep dreaming. Keanu. Tears filled her eyes as the realization hit her. Keanu had not just helped her get a job. He had believed in her from the very beginning. His gesture was a lifeline that reached beyond a single moment, a chance to create the life she had once dreamed of. She had made it this far, but with his help, Sophie knew she could go even further. The next chapter of Sophie's life felt like a dream. A year after she had stepped into the bakery, she was standing in front of her very own shop. Sophie's Sweet Haven had become more than just a name. It was a symbol of perseverance, of the power of hope and hard work. The sign above the door, freshly polished, gleamed in the morning sunlight, announcing to the world that Sophie had built something incredible from nothing. The journey had been long, and it had been full of challenges. There were days when Sophie thought about giving up, when the weight of responsibility felt like too much to bear. But she had never wavered. She had held on to the lessons she had learned from Keanu, about taking one step at a time, about finding strength even when everything seemed to be falling apart. She had found a way to keep moving forward. As the grand opening approached, Sophie was filled with excitement and nervous anticipation. She had poured every ounce of herself into this moment, and she knew it would be a turning point, not just for her, but for the many people who had supported her along the way. It was a celebration of new beginnings, of dreams that had been reignited and transformed into something real. On the day of the opening, the bakery was buzzing with energy. Sophie's friends, family, and former co-workers arrived to show their support. The air was filled with the scent of freshly baked goods, and the hum of happy chatter surrounded Sophie as she welcomed each person who walked through the door. As she looked around, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. This was everything she had worked for, everything she had fought for. And then, just as she was about to step outside to greet the next wave of customers, she saw him. Keanu was leaning casually against a motorcycle, a wide grin on his face as he watched her from across the street. His presence was like a gentle reminder that the world was full of unexpected miracles. "Well?" he asked, his voice filled with quiet pride. Sophie couldn't help but smile as she walked over to him. "I made it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Keanu chuckled softly, shaking his head. "No, Sophie. You did. I just gave you a nudge." She wrapped her arms around him in a tight embrace, holding on to him as though she could never let go. "I'll never forget this," she whispered into his ear. Keanu smiled warmly, his hands on her shoulders. "Just promise me one thing." Sophie pulled back slightly, looking at him with wide eyes. "Anything," she said, her voice steady despite the flood of emotions inside her. Keanu's eyes shone with sincerity. "When someone else needs a hand, pay it forward." Sophie smiled through her tears. "I will." Years passed, and Sophie's bakery grew even more successful. It became a beloved institution in the city, known not just for its mouth-watering pastries, but for the heart and soul that Sophie poured into it. Every morning, she arrived early to prepare for the day, ensuring that each pastry was crafted with the same love and attention to detail that had propelled her to this point. Sophie's Sweet Haven was no longer just a business, it was a sanctuary, a place of warmth and hope for those who walked through its doors. As the bakery flourished, Sophie began to focus on giving back in ways she had never imagined. She took on apprentices, young chefs who were struggling to find their place in the world, just as she had once been. She gave them the chance she had so desperately needed, a chance to prove themselves, to learn, and to grow. One evening, as the sun set behind the bakery, Sophie noticed a young girl standing outside. The girl was staring at the bakery window, her face filled with uncertainty, as though she wasn't sure if she belonged. Sophie recognized that look immediately. It was the same look she had worn when she first walked into the cafe all those years ago. Sophie smiled warmly, her heart swelling with empathy. She stepped outside and approached the girl. "What's your story?" Sophie asked gently, her voice filled with understanding. The girl hesitated, her eyes brimming with doubt. But Sophie reached out a hand, offering not just a gesture, but a lifeline. "It's okay," Sophie continued. "You're not alone. Everyone has a chance to start over." The girl's eyes began to tear up as she accepted Sophie's hand. It was a moment of recognition, a quiet understanding that Sophie had come full circle. Just as Keanu had once extended a hand to her when she needed it most, Sophie now had the opportunity to do the same for someone else. And so, Sophie's journey continued, one of love, resilience, and the endless power of paying it forward.